the world's busiest station. Clapham Junction has always held a fascination for enthusiasts. That interest came to a head in the 1960s. Come rain or shine, groups of people gathered at the end of these platforms to witness the final years of steam on the Southern. Throughout the 1960s and until as late as 1967, this remained one of Britain's last steam-worked main lines. A collection of former Southern and Standard designs continued the tradition of steam haulage along the Southern Main Line to Southampton and the coasts of Dorset and Hampshire. During the 19th century, Southampton and its docks were to develop into a lucrative source of traffic for the railways. The town itself was linked to the capital in May 1840, when the first trains began operating over the London and Southampton Railway, running via Basingstoke and Winchester. The terminus at London was built on a 4-acre site at Nine Elms, just to the south of Vauxhall Bridge. The original station at Southampton still stands. In 1923, these substantial buildings were to be given the name Terminus, the only British station, in fact, to be so titled. This line itself was superbly engineered by Joseph Locke. It avoided both severe curves and steep gradients by using a series of deep cuttings and short tunnels. As such, it allowed for fast running. Waterloo became the London terminus of the line and took over from Nine Elms on July the 11th, 1848. Southampton was connected to Dorchester via Brockenhurst, Ringwood and Wimborne in 1847. The Southampton and Dorchester Railway was 60 miles in length. Its curving, mostly single-track route earned it the name Castleman's Corkscrew. Bournemouth was bypassed by this route, although it was of little importance in the 1850s. At Dorchester, the line reached Weymouth via the Wilts, Somerset and Weymouth Railway, which opened in 1857. In 1859, Ringwood was connected to Christchurch, just to the east of Bournemouth, by a branch. By 1888, Bournemouth was placed well and truly on the railway map by the completion of a double-track main line from Lymington Junction to Hamworthy. In 1891, Eastleigh became the site of the LSWR's carriage shops, and in 1909, the company's locomotive works were moved from Nine Elms to here. The main line to the Dorset coast had been completed and would soon be entirely in the hands of the London and South Western Railway. In 1923, ownership was transferred to the Southern Railway. Finally, in 1947 came nationalisation, and the Southern Railway became the Southern Region of British Railways. Today, the entire route has been electrified, while 46 years of nationalisation is due to end with the impending privatisation of the network. The approaches to Waterloo were built on a series of brick viaducts and iron bridges in order to minimize demolition of surrounding houses. The curving line wound a course around a number of features, including Vauxhall Gardens and a nearby gasworks. The present-day terminus was completed just after the First World War. By the time the Southern Railway took over, Waterloo comprised a total of 8 approach lines, 4 up and 4 down. These led to 21 curving platform faces. A turntable and stabling point were located to the north side. Extensive offices curved along the station concourse. The station was located above a maze of surrounding streets, with York Road to the north and Lower Marsh to the south. Despite extensive rebuilding, Waterloo still suffered operational problems. Many of the platforms were too short to accept an express train of 12 coaches, together with an engine at both ends. Indeed, only platforms 9 to 14 could comfortably accommodate 12 coach trains. It was these that handled most of the mainline services to the West Country and Southampton. Despite its operational problems, the new station replaced a gloomy labyrinth of platforms which had developed piecemeal over a period of 50 years. A classic feature of the new terminus was the curving concourse, 120 feet wide and 770 feet long. Ticket, inquiry and general offices extended the full length of the concourse. A large overall roof of the ridge and furrow type was built over all 21 platforms. A new box was built and commissioned in October 1936. Controlling colour light signals with over 300 miniature levers, the new structure replaced 6 manual boxes. This was the last London terminus to retain steam. It's November 1966, and a filthy West Country departs with a Bournemouth-bound express. (80154) was one of 8 standard 264 tanks allocated to Nine Elms. Their main duties included parcels and empty carriage movements. The loco is remarkably clean for the period. The sight of a grimy collection of standard and former southern designs contrasted with the modern office blocks being built along the south bank of the Thames. Note the warship on a train from Exeter. The IVAT 262 tank is bringing empty carriage stock from Clapham Junction. From Waterloo, the main line threads through a complex of lines leading to Clapham Junction. First station was Vauxhall, and 3.5 miles beyond the terminus was, until 1967, the steam shed at Nine Elms. In steam days, the line through Vauxhall was busy with light engine movements and empty carriage workings, in addition to mainline steam. Access to Nine Elms was gained just to the west of Vauxhall Station, to the south side of the line. Coded 70A, this shed, together with its approach lines, sprawled over several acres and was surrounded largely by flats and terraced houses. Originally, the shed buildings consisted of a 15-track old shed and a 10-track newer structure. Its allocation late in 1966 consisted of Bullied West Country and Battle of Britain Pacifics, IVAT 262 tanks, and standard 264 tanks, plus a number of standard 5s. Much of the roof cover of the old shed had been removed by the Luftwaffe. Its poor condition was one reason for the transfer of the Merchant Navy Pacifics to Weymouth. Closure came on the 9th of July 1967. Beyond Nine Elms was Queen's Road, then Clapham Junction. Clapham Junction is located at the point where traffic from Victoria converged with that from Waterloo and then diverged to the south and southwest. In steam days, it had a unique atmosphere with a remarkable mix of motive power. The following scenes were taken in 1960. Clapham Junction has seen several changes and developments since the first railway arrived here in 1838 from Nine Elms. The biggest reconstruction was completed in 1907. Then, as now, the station totals 17 platforms. The longest was capable of taking 13 coach trains. The platforms were divided into 3 groups for serving 3 distinct areas. Those on the north side served suburban services to the Windsor area. Some served trains along the former London and South-Western Main Line towards Woking. The remainder served Central Division trains heading towards Croydon and Brighton. As yet another Pacific hauled express passes, we get a glimpse of 3 types in the Mansell-Mogul family. An N-class hauls empty coaching stock, followed by a more unusual 3-cylinder V1. This cross-London freight is handled by one of the 264s from Class W. A mainline stopping train hauled by an early S15 contrasts with a brand new BRCW Type 3 diesel. "27 years later, the signs have changed, but the station itself remains remarkably unaltered. Locomotive haulage is now sadly a memory, with EMUs the primary motive power. From Clapham Junction, the London and South Western Main Line headed in a westerly direction through Surbiton, Weybridge and Woking to Basingstoke. This line was quadrupled in the early years of the century to Worting Junction near Basingstoke. Today, it remains as busy as ever, with all these lines used to capacity in the morning and evening peaks. The location is New Malden. We'll now go back to February 1967. A standard Class 5 handles one of the diminishing number of Southampton boat trains. Note the 4-wheel vans and the blue and grey coach, while the train appears to include no less than 2 kitchen cars. The electrification of this line in the 1930s involved the rebuilding of a number of stations like Surbiton. These buildings date from 1937. Woking Station was also rebuilt in this period, being completed in 1938. Note the typical southern concrete sign. The design incorporated a central island platform serving the fast lines and outer platforms serving the slow lines. (34077-603) Squadron departs Woking with a train for the West Country. This film is being taken from an electric unit on the slow line. The different acceleration rates of electric versus steam will shortly be shown to good effect. Steam working between Salisbury and Exeter was, incidentally, dieselized in September 1964. At this time, there was no electrification west of Pirbright Junction. Brookwood Station was established for an unusual one-way traffic from Waterloo, bound for the nearby cemetery. The line from Woking to Basingstoke employed automatic signals. The semaphores were operated by compressed air, which was controlled from track circuits. This was the first such system to be installed and was commissioned around 1905. This and the following scenes were taken in 1960. Representative of an older generation of steam is Mansell King Arthur Sir Lamorak, hauling a Basingstoke to Waterloo train. She's coupled to a tender originally fitted to N15 3233 Remembrance. This London and South Western Railway veteran was built by Dubbs and Company in 1897. This example of the 700 class lasted over 60 years on this type of traffic. 34007 was never rebuilt and was withdrawn in 1965. Sold to Woodhams and Barry, the Loca survived and was destined for preservation. At this time, a number of schools were in evidence. It's now just 9 days before the end of steam on the Southern in July 1967. A standard 5 is Bournemouth bound at Winchfield. The area in the foreground is now the site of the M3 motorway. This train is probably the 1245 from Waterloo to Bournemouth behind 73093. The line from Waterloo to Basingstoke was extremely well engineered. The deep cutting here at Winchfield was one of several earthworks which kept gradients to a minimum. In fact, there were several long level sections, and the steepest grade did not exceed 1 in 250. This, combined with only gentle curves, enabled high-speed running. At 90 miles an hour, an immaculate 35008 passes on the 955 from Waterloo to Weymouth on the 2nd of July, 1967. In fact, the 47 miles from Waterloo to Basingstoke was booked in 55 minutes. The line west of Woking involved regular running well above 60 miles per hour. Note the Gresley buffet car in this formation. Basingstoke was a major junction on the former LSWR route. The date is the 1st of July 1967. The third rail is in place and colour lights have been installed. This signalling had replaced semaphores on the 20th of November 1966. The station was once the subject of considerable rivalry between the Great Western Railway and the LSWR. In 1932, all traffic was concentrated on the southern station, which consisted at this time of 4 main platform faces. The GWR completed a line from Reading in 1848, and the company originally used a separate station to the north of the line. We'll now go back to 1961. At this time, Basingstoke possessed a fine display of semaphores. Schools Class 30903 Charterhouse departs westbound, while one of Mansell's Lord Nelson's arrives. By this time, all of this class was based at Eastleigh. The Lemaitre chimney is particularly noticeable in this view. This particular engine was painted apple green as an experiment in 1948. Basingstoke Shed, coded 70D, was situated just to the west of the station, to the north side of the line. The brick-built shed comprised 3 roads. Interestingly, Basingstoke once had 2 sheds. The Great Western one was situated at the opposite end of the station and was closed in 1950. 70D was closed soon after these scenes were taken, in March 1963. However, it remained open as a stabling point until the end of steam on the Southern. The shed at Basingstoke was completely demolished in 1969. Today there's no trace of the building and its associated sidings. The station itself has changed little since the days of steam. It still handles cross-country traffic to the Midlands via the former Great Western Line to Reading. In addition, traffic along the former London and South Western Main Line remains as busy as ever. Just to the west of Basingstoke, at Worting Junction, the four-track section from Waterloo divides. A double-track line runs west to Salisbury, another runs southwest to Southampton. In common with the main line east of Basingstoke, this is well engineered. In fact, it possesses one of the longest constant grades of any British main line. The section either side of Winchester descends steadily through the Downs at a constant 1 in 252 for 16 miles. This carries the line through the Hampshire Downs. This was the fastest section of the main line to Southampton with a mile a minute overall timings. These scenes were taken during the last week of Southern steam. The locos, including the famous Clan line, have been polished and their nameplates replaced in readiness for the specials of the 2nd of July. .34071 begins the long climb from Winchester. The main line to Southampton reached Eastleigh in 1840. The station was originally known as Bishopstoke. It became Eastleigh in the 1880s when this structure was built. Eastleigh became a junction in 1841 when a line was added to Fareham. 6 years later, the Romsey line was opened. In 1909, the town became the home of the LSWR's locomotive works, which was transferred from Nine Elms. As a consequence, the town's population and importance expanded rapidly. These buildings produced many of the Southern's most famous locomotive types, with over 300 engines constructed. Steam repairs continued at the works until October 1966. The shed, coded 71A at this time, was located to the west of the works. It comprised a large structure accommodating 15 through lines and a complex of long approach roads. In the early 1960s, Eastleigh's allocation included M7 tanks, Merchant Navy Pacifics, IVAT and Standard tanks, as well as the entire class of Lord Nelsons, together with the King Arthurs and the Hailing Island Terriers. Eastleigh Station in 1966. Note the colour lights ready for commissioning. 30073 was one of the American War Department tanks acquired for shunting in Southampton docks. This engine was painted malachite green in November 1963 for use as the Eastleigh Works pilot. The Bournemouth Bell was first introduced in 1931 and became a daily service in 1936. This is the down train, which left Waterloo at 10:30 each morning. The 108-mile journey was made in 2 hours and 6 minutes and included a stop at Southampton. Merchant navies took over from Lord Nelson's just after the war. An extremely clean, unrebuilt Pacific, Exmouth, leaves with an up tray. Southampton and its port provided the primary source of traffic for the London and Southampton Railway. From the 1840s onwards, traffic steadily increased as new docks were opened. Freight traffic grew steadily until by the 1930s, some 100,000 wagons were dispatched each year to a wide variety of destinations. At the same time, passenger traffic grew in importance. By the 1930s, liner traffic and cross-channel sailings accounted for some 500,000 passengers each year. Local trains ran into Southampton terminus. Boat trains ran past the terminus and into the docks. In 1847, a second railway reached Southampton, the Southampton and Dorchester. Southampton West was built on the site of the original station on the Dorchester line, and until 1892 was named Bleckenden. At that time, this was in open country, far cry from today's city surroundings. The station was the subject of considerable improvements in the 1930s. The original 2 platforms and bay of 1890 were expanded to a total of 5 platforms. This was done to coincide with a major expansion of the port facilities, including the opening of new docks serving transatlantic traffic. At the same time, the station was renamed Southampton Central. A London-bound train approaches the tunnel at the eastern end of the station. Beyond this tunnel was a triangular junction with lines linking Southampton terminus and the main line to London. This tunnel intersected an old canal tunnel, which was a frequent source of engineering problems. In steam days, Central was served by an hourly fast service from Waterloo, leaving Waterloo at 30 minutes past the hour. Southampton terminus was also served by an hourly stopping service, leaving Waterloo at 27 minutes past the hour and running via Alton. A well-known feature of the station was the impressive signal gantry at the western end of the platforms. This structure did, in fact, outlive steam by many years. Southampton new docks, which were built in the 1930s, can be seen in the distance. A feature of the last years of steam was the use of Class 5s borrowed from the London Midland region. A common duty was the Sundays only 8:55 from Bournemouth to Waterloo. "34019 was another unrebuilt Pacific to survive into 1967. The line west of Southampton, along the coast of Bournemouth and then on to Weymouth, is very different in character. In steam days, the 79 miles from Waterloo to Southampton were covered in 82 minutes. In contrast, the 63 miles to Weymouth took 101 minutes, an average speed of just 37 miles per hour. Brockenhurst was the junction for two steam-operated lines, one south to Lymington and one northwest to Ringwood. Today, only the Lymington branch remains open and is served by an electric service running into the bay platform. Motive power in the early 60s was provided by M7s operating push-pull stock. Note the push-pull fitted van and the Mansell stock. Until the 4th of May 1964, Brockenhurst was the point where the line to Wimborne and Ringwood diverged. This was the route of the original Southampton and Dorchester Railway. It wound a course inland, bypassing Bournemouth, which at that time was just a village. The line had been promoted by a solicitor at Wimborne by the name of Castleman. This led to the name Castleman's Corkscrew. The Wimborne section was bypassed by the opening of the direct line through Bournemouth in 1888. From that date, it became a backwater. From Brockenhurst, the main line headed through the New Forest and some classic locations. The coastline around present-day Bournemouth was not to see any real development until the late 19th century. It was consequently bypassed by the line to Weymouth, and it wasn't until 1870 that the area was reached by a branch running south to Christchurch, just to the east of Bournemouth. The present-day Folkestone station lies on the course of the extension westwards through Bournemouth. In 1888, Bournemouth was placed on a direct line from Southampton to Dorchester. Bournemouth Central was opened at the same time and replaced the original East Station a quarter of a mile away. Central comprised 4 through lines and 2 long platforms, each capable of taking 14 coaches. A shed was located to the northwest side of the station. In 1930, the westbound platform was doubled in length to take 2 14-coach trains. The depot can be seen to the right of the picture. The shed structure was surprisingly small for such a busy depot and consisted of a building containing 4 tracks with a rather basic asbestos roof covering. It was surrounded by residential suburbs. Note the typical southern concrete fencing. $80085 lasted until the very last week of Southern steam. The Bournemouth Bell originated from West Station, 3.5 miles away. Unusually, Central retained an overall roof. It stood in contrast to Bournemouth West, which had developed piecemeal and was largely cluttered as a result. Many expresses to Waterloo were divided at Central, with one part originating from Bournemouth Central and the other part from Weymouth. Once beyond Bournemouth and Poole, the landscape and character of the former London and South Western Main Line changes. The hills of Dorset provide some very different surroundings. They also result in some steep gradients as the railway heads west and then south into Weymouth. The steepest grades are found on the climb to Binkham Tunnels near Upwey, with a 1 in 50 ascent from Weymouth. From the east, the line climbed on varying grades all the way from Wareham and culminated in a 1 in 91 grade near the summit. In steam days, Wareham was the point where the branch to Swanage diverged. Swanage branch train is awaiting departure on the right. Dorchester was a particularly interesting location. The original terminal of the Dorchester and Southampton Railway survived in use until the 1970s. Trains had to reverse to gain access to the up platform. Had the LSWR's plans to extend from here to Exeter been fulfilled, then this would have been a through line. Today, a new platform has been constructed, thus avoiding a time-consuming reversal. At Dorchester, the former London and South Western Main Line joined the Great Western Line for the final section south to Weymouth. It was a challenging climb, a grade of 1 in 50. Steam bankers were provided by Weymouth Shed for many steam and diesel-hauled trains. At this time, Weymouth was the source of a surprising amount of freight traffic. Extensive yards were situated just to the northwest of the station. Weymouth Shed was located in the northeast side of the line, around half a mile to the north of Weymouth Station. A Waterloo-bound train leaves Weymouth in the last week of steam with the usual steam banker. Steam shed can be seen alongside the line. The shed was closed on the 9th of July 1967 and was demolished in 1971. Today the entire site has disappeared beneath a housing estate. We've come 142 miles through a variety of landscapes to Weymouth. In that distance, the character of the line has changed from commuter railway to double-track secondary line, from city to seaside resort. Sadly, unlike Waterloo and Clapham Junction, this station has been transformed since the days of steam. Today, all traces of the Southern and Great Western Railways have disappeared. Services from Waterloo to Bournemouth and Weymouth had been announced as a candidate for electrification as part of the modernisation plans for British Railways. It had been originally intended to use 25 kV power from overhead wires, but it soon became obvious that this would be impractical due to cost and problems electrifying the line between Clapham Junction and Waterloo. So, in the autumn of 1964, a 750-volt DC scheme using third rail was announced, together with a re-signalling scheme. This was to involve the line from Woking to Branksome, just west of Bournemouth Central. The line from Woking to Waterloo had already been electrified using third rail. The first 4 TC sets had in fact entered service from August 1966. However, with just 3 units available, their impact on steam traction was limited. However, the introduction of a number of brush Type 4s had a greater impact, and these became a common sight, particularly on the Bournemouth Belle. Early 1967 saw all local trains running as far as Basingstoke replaced by electric traction, and later in the spring more electric sets became available. Steam was to have been replaced by an all-electric service from the 10th of June 1967. In the event, a shortage of the new electric units postponed this. Trains like the Bournemouth Belle retained steam as well as diesel haulage right up until the very end. The scene was taken in the last week of steam. The end finally came on the 9th of July, 1967. Silence and solitude, where there was once the sound of steam. Britain's last steam-worked main line had entered a new era.